My name's Jason. I work as Chief Enterprise Architect in Ardoq. We're a tool company, but my job is to run the Center of Excellence. So we do a lot of research into how the industry is progressing, and from our purposes, we push that into product direction. But what I want to talk to you about is one of the interesting trends we've noticed when we do that research and what it means, and it's all about. Actually, something Bryce and Wendy were talking about quite a lot. How do you show the value of what you do? And that doesn't matter if you're enterprise architect or solution architect or business architect. Yeah, a lot of people are talking about how do we show the value, and even one of the very specific things we notice is when we talk to teams of architects, clearly that's because they want to start using a tool. But one of the interesting questions that comes up is we are in the process of rebooting our team. We need to start showing the value of what we do. And that might be because there's a new CIO in town or a new COO or perhaps a new chief architect and they want to get started. Or perhaps there's a cost-cutting exercise going on in the company. All these things happen, and once we dig in with the team, what are you trying to achieve? Why are you trying to achieve it? Often we come to this question, we need to reboot what we're doing and we'd like your help. Or can you help us? Or can you share information about how other teams are showing the value of what they do? And that's the polite way of putting it. And that was some of the very polite questions that came up in the previous session, but it's not always so polite. It's not always so easy. Sometimes it comes up as, we're really struggling to get a seat at the table. And can you share some insight in how other teams get a seat at the table? Or we're really struggling to get access to our stakeholder. Or we're struggling to get people to consume what we do. We spend a lot of effort and we're really frustrated that what our team does doesn't seem to be moving the needle. And if I take it to the very far in the extreme, sometimes we speak to groups and they say, look, we're doing a massive transformation and our CIO or our head of transformation seems to be paying far more attention to a group of consultants that have been brought in than they are to us. And we're just getting sidelined. Can you help us? What starts as a very professional discussion about what are you doing and how do you show value can sometimes turn into a type of therapy session with the architects. So we've been digging into this, trying to understand how can architects talk about the value of what they do. About a year ago, we did a survey of a customer base, and it was about 120, 130 architects, many chief architects. Just what is the biggest mistake you've made in your career? And by far the most common answer was not being able to show the value of what we do, not being able to connect what we do to the outcomes of the company as a whole. Many of the other things they talk about are connected to that, such as failing to communicate, not being able to produce things that are consumed by the organization, not being able to, again, get a seat at the table. And when we started analyzing this, we start to find that often these teams talk about the techniques that they use, the deliverables that they produce. And that was one of the things that came up in the very last question, one of the last questions that Bryce and Wendy were discussing. What are the deliverables? How do I make them useful? And it's strange. It's not, what can I say? If you recognize yourself in this, you're certainly not alone. I mean, even myself, I recognize it as well. I work for Ardoq now, but before I worked in Ardoq, I was responsible for architecture design in a multinational telecom company. I've been chief architect in one of their regional operations. And I've suffered from this as well, where there is just so much to do. There are just so many tasks to do that you end up you're on the hamster wheel, just doing work. And sometimes you struggle to take a step back and say, well, why am I doing that work? It's just so busy. So that's what we want to talk about. How can you take a step back? How can you focus on the things that you're doing, all these deliverables, all these activities, and how can you prove the value of that so you can get a seat at the table, so you can get more investment in your team? And to not put too fine a point on it, there's many situations now where people are struggling with cost cutting in a company and they really need to justify what they do. So how can you justify your team? So how do we talk about value? We often talk about these activities. We talk about these deliverables that we do. We get into capability maps. We get into how you model the value streams in your company, how you deal with strategy to execution, how you create asset management of everything you have and how it hangs together with the business. But what's the value in that? So I started looking at research in the industry. How do we talk about value as architects? And again, that can be business architecture, the other parts of enterprise architecture, solution architecture. Everyone needs to be talking about the value they provide to their company. So I found two very good articles in research that talk about this, and they collect lots of different experience. So this first one I'm going to talk about, and yeah, you'll get the PDF later, and you can follow the reference. It's freely available. This first one went and studied 250 different articles about enterprise architecture. And of those 250, only 50 of those actually spoke about the value provided by enterprise architecture that the authors could find. And of those 50, only about 20 could actually show empirical evidence for what they do, which is not to say we don't provide value, but we are terrible at proving that we provide value, and we need to be better. So let's dig into some of that. If you look at some of these examples, and I never know how the resolution is for different people on their screens, or if you're doing a conference presentation and it's up on a big screen. So I'll pull out a slightly bigger slice. One of the examples we often talk about is, hey, we improve business IT alignment, or we enable governance, or we facilitate better capability development and road mapping. We improve communication. It's all very fluffy. It's all very high level. We understand it, or we say we understand it. We see the value in this, but it's not very concrete. It's not very quantifiable. So let's talk about that. But before we do that, let's look at a second example. In this one, the authors went out and interviewed, I'll just check my notes. They interviewed about 20 different organizations of various sizes, from between 10,000 employees up to 100,000 plus employees, with very sort of medium to large scale IT environments. And they said, tell us about what you do as an architecture team. Tell us about the value that you bring to your company. And one of the really nice things they did as well was, what makes it difficult for you to deliver that value? And again, they looked at all the different activities, looked at all the deliverables that we always talk about. Here's what I produce, or here's the activities that I do. And then once you start getting into the values they provide, it's, well, we facilitated more communication, or we help to clarify priorities, or we improve business IT alignment, or we improve communication. All these examples are things that we talk about as architects, and we can sit back and we can nod and say, yes, that's definitely what I do. But they're not something that's easy for our stakeholders to understand. We might understand them, and we can nod sagely and say, yes, very good, we all do this. But if you think about your CIO or your COO, They only have so much money to go around, and they have a job to do. They have to improve the execution of their company, either from a business perspective or IT, or preferably going across both. So why should they invest in you? Why should they invest in your team? Well, not just you, why should they invest in us? That's a question they have. Right? Actually, yesterday I just got back from the Gartner IT symposium in Barcelona, and maybe some of you were at the one in Orlando a couple of weeks ago. And there's many, many different talks, all aimed at these CIOs, COOs, CTOs, about what they should do, how they should get better, where they should invest. Different techniques they should use. Strategy to execution was huge. Lots of other things. And there's a whole floor of different vendors talking about things they can sell them to help them achieve these goals. And all of those are possible steps that a COO or a CIO, a CTO, all the C's that care about execution, they're all the investments they can make. And we are only one of many different investments. So why would they invest in us instead of a tool that advertises itself, that achieves a certain amount of value, something that improves, a new way of doing CRM, or a new way of doing monitoring, or something which improves security? Why not invest in all of that rather than an architecture team? And we all have these pithy statements like, what if you think it's expensive to have an architecture team, you should see the cost of not having an architecture team. Right? They're great things to say, and people nod at them, but at the end of the day, if you're a CIO or a COO, you need to make a decision. Where am I going to get the most return on my investment? Is that an improved architecture team, or is it somewhere else in my organization? And we are quite bad at giving them the kind of information that would help them make that decision. Let's talk a bit about that. Let's see how we can improve it. So what does a company try to achieve? They try to achieve many things, but it basically comes down to three. How do you increase revenue or improve revenue? How do you reduce cost? And how do you operate the company at an acceptable level of risk? And everything we do as architects, you need to be able to tie that up to those three large value buckets, you can think of them as, because that's what the executive team cares about. Underneath the executive team, you have your CIOs and your COOs and CISOs and CTOs and all the other ones who are focused on how are we going to achieve those strategies. Different strategies for improving revenue, different strategies for reducing cost or dealing with risk. How are we actually going to execute? And it's often we as architects, whether business or enterprise or solution, etc., that are looking at the different techniques for improving what we are going to do to achieve those strategic aims. So if you're, either we find capability gaps that we need to fill to achieve strategic goals, to improve revenue, or maybe we need to divest part of our organization and outsource it in order to reduce cost, or maybe we need to do a massive investment in how we deal with personally identifiable information to reduce risk and meet our compliance goals. These are all different things we can do. And then the architects will go in and say, okay, how do we actually do that in practice? How do we make those execution goals happen? But we need to connect up and we need to start quantifying how we do that. If we talk about some of our deliverables, say capability models, we talk about how wonderful they can be. If you just sit back, have a look at it, capability models by themselves serve no purpose. They have no inherent value. Their only value is in how you use them to achieve some other goal. And they can be very good for creating a common vocabulary. They can be very good for having a common framework on which to discuss many different types of gaps and potential improvements in a company. But that's where the value is for the organization. There's no value in having a capability map. There's value in using one to improve how you communicate so that you can make decisions faster and with better quality. That's the value for a company, not the technique in and of itself. So we have to understand that everything we do, all the activities we do, all the deliverables we produce, how do we connect them up to what the execution objectives are for a company, and then the strategic goals that they are trying to help. We need to join those dots together. So you can think of it as a type of hierarchy, a value chain. Yeah. At the top level, we have the strategic goals of the company. The next level, you have the execution objectives in order to achieve those goals. And down below, we have all the things that an architect would do, all the deliverables, all those activities. And on the right-hand side, you can think about, well, for each of those things that we do and all those outcomes we're trying to serve, how would we measure that we're actually doing the right thing? What are the metrics to show that we're actually being successful? So at the lowest level, we have let me look at my multiple screens for a moment. We have different indicators perhaps of how we're using capability maps. We have a capability map which covers the entirety of our business and what we do, or maybe multiple operating units? Or is it sophisticated enough that it can deal with many different parts of the organization and how they operate in different ways? And the next level up, it's the execution goals of the COO and the CIO. Yeah. What do they want to achieve? Well, maybe they want to maybe they want to achieve, having a roadmap and understanding how they will deliver certain benefits over a certain period of time. And for those benefits, which ones can they do that they just have to in order to enable the company going forward, and how much then discretionary income or money do they have in order to do new things as they come down the pipe from different parts of the business. Yeah. But they can do that based on how we use a capability map, and then the metric they would use is having a very good understanding of how much money has to go into actually running the business versus how much money can be spent on changing the business to deliver these kinds of strategic outcomes. Yeah. So we have to think about at these multiple different levels, right? Joining the dots. If we were in a greenfield environment in a company, we would sit down and talk about what are the business goals of the company, what are the execution goals, the IT strategy, maybe the COO's execution strategy, the CISO's execution strategy. And then we would say, okay, here are the things that we are going to do as architects to make that happen. But often we don't have that luxury of doing very top-down strategic planning. So sometimes you need to look at what you're currently doing and go a bit more bottom up. What are we doing as an architecture team? And for each of those things that we do, why are we doing it? And how does that support our stakeholders? How does that support our CIO, our COO, our CISO? And how do we measure that benefit? So doing a bottom-up thinking, just take a step back, look at what you and your team are doing, and start asking why. Can we connect this further up the chain? Let's look at a couple of examples. So if you look at simple cost reduction, as an architect, one of the simplest, most banal activities that we do, let's keep track of our application landscape, our IT environment, and understand what we have. Basic application lifecycle management. We spend a certain amount of time on this in our companies. But if you think about why are we doing it? Does the company need to be spending time for you or members of your team to be performing that activity? What is in it for them? If you think about what your CIO is interested in, or the people who work in GRC in the company, they need to execute, they need to show that the company is operating at an acceptable level of risk. And when they are audited as a company, when the company is audited, that they can produce a high quality report in a short period of time that ensures that we can show compliance, or the level of compliance that we think is acceptable to do. So that's one of the reasons you do application lifecycle management. Right? That's the activity that you do, but the value that you're bringing to the company is that you're shortening the time it takes to respond to an audit request. You are ensuring, often you're ensuring that the company is operating both at an acceptable level of risk, and actually doing the activity will reduce the level of risk. So instead of saying we're doing a lot of application lifecycle management, if you can say we are reducing the risk profile of the company by 20% for our ISO 27001 requirements, that is a totally different conversation that you can have with your CIO or your COO. And it makes much more sense to them, because as soon as you quantify it, it doesn't have to be perfect quantification, and we can come back to that. It just has to be some type of quantification, order of magnitude quantification. That makes it possible then for that executive to compare what you're doing with other parts of their portfolio that they own. Yeah, and they're able to compare. Why should I invest in your team over something else? Well, now you're giving them a way to answer that question. Yeah? So just doing application lifecycle management can be a first step. And then you will do business capability mapping. From business capability mapping, as I mentioned before, doesn't have much value of itself. But if you join it up to the applications, which applications, excuse me, are realizing which capabilities, and you start to show that together, and you can start to show which parts of our business are providing which capabilities and the applications, then you can start to show overlaps. Why do we have 10 different applications that do the same thing? Right? You're opening up possibilities for your executives to make better decisions. And then on top of that, you can start to apply, for example, cost management, IT cost management. If you can start to show, here is the cost in our IT portfolio, and here's how it maps up to our business capabilities, or here's how it maps up to the departments or organization units which provide those capabilities, and here's how that can be allocated to the parts of the organization that either consume those capabilities or make use of those capabilities in their value chains. Then what the absolute first thing you're offering is you're offering a different type of conversation for your CIO when your CIO is part of a forum at that executive level. So one of the hard parts of being a CIO, or at least many of the places I've worked, is often the IT department feels like the cost center, and everyone else in the company feels like revenue, or definitely the business part of the company, not so much the operational. But it's hard to feel like the cost center all the time. And it creates a dynamic in the company, which I think many of us have experienced. It's not a very pleasant dynamic. But just doing lifecycle management, business capability modeling, cost management, and then showing how that allocates to different parts of the business. It's not that business is revenue and IT is cost. You're actually showing how business and IT together are both the cost and the revenue. You're actually showing what it costs. And if you then include projects, what are the cost of projects, and what is the cost then of projects allocated to different capability changes over the course of time? You can start to show, again, what the cost is in order to achieve certain business goals in the company, and which parts of the business are making use of those changes in order to achieve their goals. And the whole dynamic of the conversation between business and IT changes. and you've enabled that dynamic. Yeah. That one's hard to quantify, but I can guarantee you that your CIO will love you if you do it. Just providing them that ability to have a different kind of conversation. And that's something you can offer them. You know, why do you want to have a capability model? Why do you want to spend time making sure that it's up to date? Why do you want to make sure that IT is involved? Why do you want to spend time adding IT costs? You are providing your CIO the ability to have a totally different relationship in the business. Yeah. Going beyond that, oh, sorry. You can then get into application rationalization. Right? And a very simple thing is showing, okay, if we're going to spend time doing application rationalization, what is the CapEx and OpEx change potentially over time? Right? That is something your CIO cares about, especially when the CIO is reporting up to the CFO. Right? But another thing you can do is you can get more nuanced, and you can say, look, as an architect, we can do application rationalization. What we can also do is we can provide you with a much better way of prioritizing change projects. You know, if you have a choice between, let's see, we can implement a change project in a very quick and dirty way. We can take the short-term solution, or we can take the long-term solution. I'm sure many of you have been part of these discussions. If you offer people the short-term approach in terms of time to market versus the long-term approach, and you say, if we go the short way, it's going to increase technical debt, and that will be bad. But if we do it the better way, we'll be able to have more, deliver more over time. 99 times out of 100, people will take the short-term approach. Get to market, get to market, get to market. It almost rules over everything else in all situations. But if you change the conversation and try and quantify that a bit more and say, look, let's think about opportunity cost. As an architect, what you're dealing with often is trade-offs. How can you quantify those trade-offs? You know, we can always talk about technical debt, and we all understand it's a bad thing. But for people outside the architecture profession, it often has very little. They have very little understanding of what technical debt means. But if you can say, look, we do 200 significant projects in our company every year. And for each of those projects, after this point, if we take the quick and dirty solution, then the cost of each of those projects is going to go up by 15%, just because of the amount of time it will take to do the small refactoring changes we need to do. And the amount of risk involved in actually delivering successfully in terms of time to market and and actually ability to achieve what we want in the market will also go up by that amount. And then you include that in each of your estimations going forward. You say, okay, you made this short-term solution, or you made this short-term decision. Now, every time we estimate a project, and we can look at the history of estimation, you can see there's going to be an extra 20% cost on everything that we do. That's a different type of conversation. You're not just using terms like technical debt and good and bad, but you're using terms that your stakeholders can understand and they can factor it in. Yeah. So you can do lifecycle management, capability modeling, IT cost management, all these techniques that we talk about, but you need to put it, why are you doing it? We're doing it to reduce the cost. We're reducing it to improve time to market, or we're doing it so that we can give you the ability to choose more successfully between short-term and long-term decisions, doing those trade-offs that you want to do. Okay. Let's go into a different one. So let's look at strategy to execution. Right? Why do you do strategy to execution? And it's easy to say, well, so I'm trying to, I don't know, Wendy has some nice examples in her book, and even Gartner this week in the conference was talking about, if I need to remember correctly, 48% of companies do not execute successfully on their strategies. That's a crazy high number. And the C-level are starting to understand this. So how can you talk about the things that you do that actually improve that for them? So again, you can talk about, well, we need to keep track of application lifecycle management. We need to show that relationship, that business IT alignment between applications and capabilities and or processes and value streams. We need to show integrations between everything. But the reason you're doing that, one, is so that you can start to say, well, now we get a much better understanding of the impact. As I mentioned, many think about medium to large scale companies, right? It's not unusual to have 1 to 200 significant change initiatives that they're trying to do each year, where significant change initiative is complicated. Like, it's not immediately obvious how to do it. So they need to do analysis of what it means. They need to build a business case, understanding that the cost, the effort involved. So the effort that you're putting into capability modeling and application lifecycle modeling and integration analysis, integration management in your company, the reason you do it is so that you can reduce the impact analysis time in change to execution by a certain %. And you can measure that. It doesn't have to be very precise. It can be quite back of the envelope type estimation. But once you start putting it in those terms, then you change the conversation you have with your executives. It's not just, well, we have to do this technique. You're putting it in their terms. They care about time to market. They care about how they can compete. They can, if they have this new disruptor in the industry and they have to try and change how they work, they have to try and get new products and services to market quicker. And you can show that the deliverables that you're providing help with that, then that's showing the value of what you do in terms that they understand. And just doing the reduction in analysis time is one step. You can then start going into strategy to execution, and you can use a lot of these statistics about how little or how much companies struggle with their strategy to execution, and then what is it that you're doing to improve on strategy to execution. You can show that just by saying, here are all the initiatives in the company, and here is the way that we're mapping those up to our strategy and objectives, and here is how we're creating performance indicators, both leading and lagging indicators on those initiatives to deliver on those objectives. We are improving our strategy to execution. If it's true that 50% of companies are not executing successfully on their strategy to execution, and you can show that you're helping to improve your company in doing that, that's huge value in what you're doing. And when you start doing that, you build trust as well. So you're quantifying what you do, showing the value, but what's in it for us as architects. We often struggle with trust to people that really understand what we do, because a lot of the deliverables that we provide, they don't provide deliverables that are used by the company itself with the customer or whichever channel, right? We don't produce products and services that we sell to other places. Often what we do is enable. All those adjectives or adverbs that we were talking about earlier in those studies that I showed, it's often facilitate and improve and enable and reduce different things. It's often not a deliverable that someone will take it externally in the market. Sometimes it is, of course, but most of the time it's not. We enable people to do other things. And you need to try and quantify that enablement or that improvement in quality. And when you do that, it builds trust. And when you build trust, then you get a seat at a different table, or then you get involved earlier in the process. Another example often had with VPs I've worked with before is just that they would say, look, we're tired of having these fantastic ideas and then coming to the architecture team or coming to the IT department or whoever it is and being told that it's going to take forever to happen. What we really want is to have a conversation to say, here's the different things we're talking about. We would like to know what the possibilities are. And understanding the possibilities will change the way we prioritize what we do. And so doing the EA deliverables that will then help change the conversation with your business partners can reduce the lead time from prioritization to time in the market, so time to value from the business perspective. And one of the ways to show that you're improving time to value is to show we will provide you deliverables that help give you an understanding of the possibilities rather than coming far later in the process. And if you improve time to value, you improve lead time on prioritization, then you totally change the conversation between you and your team and what they do and the executives that you're trying to serve. So let's take a step back out now and think about, well, what can we do going forward? I know for myself in my career, it's taken me a long time to really understand this. Right? I had a background in very technical architecture and then moved up, operated as a chief architect, been a consultant as well for quite a long time. But when you have that technical background, or even just any kind of junior, right? You're there to solve problems, whether they're technical problems or business problems. And we're often motivated by solving problems, which is the how, right? How do we solve this problem? It's almost the first thing we think about whenever we hear of something to do. It's, oh, how would I solve this? How would I solve this problem? And you have to convince yourself to start with, why would I do that? What's the benefit if I solve that problem? Or if I use this particular technique, why would that be a good thing? So we need to break out of the how as our first response and start thinking about the why. Whether you use this particular book or another book, it doesn't matter, because when you start thinking about the why, you start talking about what you do in terms that your stakeholders understand. This is what we're going to do. We have this problem in the company. Let's take strategy to execution again, right? And you can say to people, you don't have to go into the details of the process changes you are doing as a starting point. You don't have to go into, okay, we're going to have these toll gates now, or we're going to change how we use an architecture review board. You can say, look, our problem is that we've shown that the lead time from idea to prioritization, and then from prioritization to actual value in the market is X. And we can't keep up with our competitors. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce that lead time. We have different ideas. And if we reduce that lead time, these are the number of new products and services we'll be taking to the market instead of what we're doing now. So just talking about why and quantifying it is quite often all you need to get someone's attention and even sometimes just approval for what you're going to do. Just why and what will it cost? Because then you're talking about the cost and the benefit. And then sometimes people will dig into, well, how are you going to go about that? Why should I believe you? And then you can go in to the tremendous amount of analysis I'm sure you've done on how you'll make it happen. But how you make it happen is the second thing. Right? You shouldn't start with how, you should start with why. Then the next thing is to quantify. Quantify as much as you can. Almost everything can be quantified. There's maybe not always the cost benefit in going into everything, but if perhaps some of you are familiar with Tom Gill, as a well-known empirical architecture researcher, he says you can quantify anything if you try, and he has tremendous number of examples if you go to his website, so you can go and check that out. But a simple thing you can do is just think about, for each of the deliverables that we're doing, how would we know that we're being successful? Like, why are we doing this deliverable? How do we know that we're being successful? And if you can just do that and quantify what it means to be successful, that's a huge step forward as an architect. Some of those indicators can be sort of, you can think of leading and lagging indicators, but maybe from our perspective, you think about, well, this is the deliverable I'm doing. Oh, let's say we're doing strategy to execution improvements. What is the objective? Well, the objective is to improve the amount of investment we do that's directly tied to strategy, and improving on the outcomes of those, that we actually deliver the value we proposed and on time and with the amount of effort we were thinking. Or we can actually understand it as we, in an agile way, deal with change as it comes. So that can be an objective indicator rather than the leading indicator. You can think of what is the objective. We're going to improve the amount of investment we do that's directly tied to strategic objectives of the company, and there's a tight relation between those things. You then might have rather than lagging, you can think of perhaps an enabling indicator. What would be the first thing we could do to enable that to happen? Well, the first thing is to actually have strategy and objectives that people understand, strategy and objectives that are well understood or linked, cascading from strategy to objectives in the departments that have to execute and deliver on those. And then once you have those objectives and those are quantified, that's what you connect to your initiatives. So you might have I think back to an example of a project I work on. We had a strategic objective in one of our companies to be more user-centric, more customer-focused. And the way we would know that we were more customer-focused is that we had more customers that were buying multiple products. So we had an objective indicator was ARPU per user, average revenue per customer across multiple product lines. But then when we broke it down to what would we do to enable that, and looking at the capabilities we would need, well, one of our problems was we couldn't uniquely identify our customers. They were just let's see, accounts that we had. And as long as they were paying their bills, it didn't matter who they were. So our first enabler, which is something which maybe doesn't make sense to the business, is just how many uniquely identifiable customers can we have? What can we do to improve that number? And we created lots of initiatives to do that. From a business perspective, it's not immediately obvious that the number of uniquely identifiable customers is an important thing. But if you show it's an enabling, quantified enabling indicator to get us to the actual objective, which is improving how many customers are buying across our product lines, then they could understand what we were doing. So think about everything you do and what is the objective for the company? What is the objective either for the business owner? What is the objective for your CIO? That can be quantified in their terms. And then what are you doing that maybe has an enabling indicator that you can connect to it? So not just the deliverables, but how do you quantify that you're being successful with that deliverable? And often when we talk to companies about this, talk to our customers, we get into a type of analysis paralysis, like how would I know? How would I be precise? I mean, we don't know. We can't measure to that level of detail. And what we've found is it's often not necessary. It's not necessary to be extremely precise. As long as you can start to estimate, and estimation, you can think of as a synonym for educated guessing. As long as you can estimate approximately order of magnitude or even t-shirt sizing, what it is you're doing, then you are providing a way of explaining what you're doing in terms that the people you serve understand. And that's the value of what you're trying to do. Often we get focused too much on the precision of what we're trying to do and not so much on the usefulness of what we're trying to do. And it's not the same thing. Being extremely precise in measuring what we do, or being extremely precise in how we model, or being extremely precise in how we present the detail that we've come to understand in the company is not as important as what would someone do with that. And often the more precise you try and be, you become less useful to the company. And you need to find that balance point. And I guess obvious examples are, how deep do we need to go into a capability model? How many levels, or how many levels of precision when we're modeling processes? Or to what extent do we need to go into all the details of our integration architecture and everything we need to cover? What can we use every single element in Archimate to model our company? And the answer more often than not is no. You don't need to go very deep if you start to think about the benefit you're trying to provide. And if you focus very much on the benefit you're trying to provide, it's just enough for someone else to achieve their goal. Again, because what we do is we enable others. We produce deliverables and artifacts that often enable others to do their job for the business. And how can you be useful to them? Okay, so that was quantify as much as you can, measure as much as you can, and it's possible to do. I think one of the most useful bits of advice I ever got from someone was, if you're ever doing a talk, always finish the talk on what could the audience do tomorrow. Often our talks are quite abstract, so let me try and finish on something I've used before and we recommend to architects we talk with, and I've learned from others as well. Create an architecture epic description for yourself. Think about what you do as a team. Think about all the things you do. And then this particular example, it's just been adapted from the Safe Business Epic template. You could use a different template. Template's not important. What's important is what you're trying to capture. What are we doing and why are we doing this activity? For this deliverable that we produce, who is going to make use of it? What is the benefit to them? So what are they doing today? And what is the benefit that we're going to provide with this deliverable? And then if we did that, what does good look like? How do we measure the success of doing that? And if you have that, you can start, well, one is you can start to show the benefit to others. You can start to prioritize better your own team. Because like everyone else, when you run an enterprise architecture team, there's always more to do than there is capacity to do it. So how do you know that you're actually prioritizing the right things in your team? So this will help you there. The other thing is, once you start doing this and you start measuring, you can quantify and show the value of your team. And if you ever get into a discussion of, we need to reduce we've got a 10% reduction in the budget in the company this year. Why should we keep, the capacity we have in your architecture team? And why should we do that instead of saying investing in something else? You actually have evidence to show this is the value that we bring to the company. So give it a try. See how you go. Hope it helps. And that's all I've got for you today.
Well, hi, Jason. This is Roman. I just going to step in here for a few minutes for Paul. There was that question that was asked, and I wanted to see if you had a few minutes to maybe answer it for us.
Sure.
A few of the CIOs consider enterprise architecture as an investment and not necessarily ready to initiate a EA program. So what they will do is they will go directly to their domain or solution architects and question, why do we need enterprise architecture? What's your advice to CIOs who focus on quick wins, outcomes in short durations?
For enterprise architects?
Yes.
I mean,
guess the thought
it's a
is
fair question,
enterprise
and we should be asking ourselves, why are we here in this company? And if you can't answer that question yourself, well, I mean, that's the first problem. That's the first red flag you need to sort out. So one of the things we see is there's more of a distinction now between, as people try and distribute autonomy in an organization in order to improve throughput in the company, improve time to market. You know, they're doing enterprise safe, or they're going over from project to product and product aligned teams. There seems to be less of a role for these enterprise architects. Yeah. But there is always a role for someone who can look across. So if you're trying to distribute autonomy and you keep track of the change initiatives that are coming in a company, it is not possible that 100% of the change initiatives that happen in a company match perfectly with the domains or the product areas that you define. There's always something that goes across. So that's something that you'll always have. So being able to show that split between initiatives that go within a single domain and things which need to go across and therefore need to be coordinated, need to be prioritized, that's something to show the value of what you need to do. Another aspect you'll find is that when you have domain-specific architects, they necessarily focus on their domain, and they can be very good at it. But it means they often lack context when part of their initiative sort of meets the rest of the company. And you have that knowledge. As an enterprise architect that goes across, you have the knowledge of how all these domains fit together. Yeah? So no domain is an island. And you need to help. That often means that because decision-making and autonomy is less centralized, there's less of a single point where you or your team are doing the architecture or have your review board or whatever it is that you do. And more of your role goes over to coaching and facilitating the communication between the domains. And being able to show how much interaction happens between domains shows the benefit of what you're doing. So there's always a role for going across. It's a different type of role than maybe what you've had when you had a more top-down command and control part of the organization. But there's definitely a role, and you can still show the benefit, and you can measure the benefit of having that facilitating role, that coaching role.
Okay. What do you think about organizations that maybe don't yet have an enterprise architecture practice in them, and convincing a CIO, for example, the value of enterprise architecture? Since a lot of what you're describing of working across organizations is what a CIO might think of themselves as doing.
Sure. I mean, it's never a goal to have an enterprise architecture team. If you look at that hierarchy I had before, you'll have a CEO that cares about improving revenue and reducing cost, and you'll have a CIO and a CISO and a COO that cares about executing. And you'll think about, what do we need to achieve those goals? So as a CIO, if we use that part of enterprise architecture, helping a CIO, the goal is one of the goals will always be, make sure we minimize the cost in just running the business so that you can maximize the amount of money you have to change the business. Right? And if it's not money, it can be capacity. So one of the goals, one of the deliverables of an enterprise architect is to improve that split between sort of operating the business versus changing the business. What are the activities you're doing to ensure that you're getting the most effective split? And that can be, reducing the amount of effort it is to ensure compliance, because there's always a certain amount of money that has to be spent on ensuring compliance, and some of the deliverables you provide can do that more cheaply than if there isn't an architecture team. And then when it comes to any company which is more than 10 years old, will have a load of applications that they do not know why they're there. or there has a significant amount of overlap with other applications. So just refactoring, not refactoring an application, refactoring a digital business is something that needs to happen all the time, continuously. Once it gets to a certain size, gets to a certain age, it just accrues debt that you need to remove through enterprise refactoring. That's a job for an enterprise architect. How do you drive strategy to execution? You can show the statistics of the companies that struggle with it. Once a company gets to a size and an age, they struggle with it too. So again, the activities you provide as an enterprise architect is to improve how we're actually delivering change based on strategy rather than, what someone would like to do in their particular kingdom. And that's the benefit you're providing. The fact that you're an enterprise architecture team is a secondary thing. You're providing the value first, and then the skill set that you need in order to provide that value happens to be an enterprise architecture skill set, and that's how you justify yourself and your team.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. I think that kind of finishes off our questions for today. It's been very great talk, and I think we got a lot out of it. So thank you for your talk.
Thanks very much, Raymond. Thanks, everyone, and good luck.